I am Lynda Lee Smith, your host this evening, and I am delighted that you're with us for this edition of Atlanta Live. On tonight's program, we're going to discuss a critical topic that needs to be exposed, dealt with, and stopped. A topic that impacts our society every day, child abuse. We will discuss the effects on the life of a child and the long-lasting impacts on their adult lives. To discuss this topic, we have a panel of 4 who are very savvy on this subject. We will discuss simple steps caretakers and parents can take to recognize risky situations, and we will discuss the astonishing link to incarceration rates. Joining us to share their own personal perspectives are David Moody, Chief Executive Officer of C.D. Moody Construction, Kate Basha, Chief Executive Officer of the National Incarceration Association, Chris Yaden, Executive Director of SAPREA, a global nonprofit dedicated to education, prevention, and healing resources for sexually abused survivors, and Carl Jamal, CJ, Executive Director of the Maverick City Music Initiative. But before we go into our discussions with the panel, we're going to take a break and watch a short video by SAPREA.
This is Deja. She loves unicorns. Liam likes sports. He wants to play college basketball. Adia dreams of being a TikTok star. Owen loves art, especially painting. And this is Anna. She has her entire life ahead of her. All of these children will experience the trauma of child sexual abuse. Deja will attempt suicide twice in her lifetime. Liam will start abusing drugs and alcohol in the next 3 years. Adia will start cutting at 15. Owen will suffer from chronic depression. Anna will be diagnosed with failure to thrive, struggle in school, and deal with an unwanted pregnancy at 16. It needs to stop, and we can help. SAPREA exists to liberate individuals and society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. Learn more at saprea.org.
SAPREA is doing great work, and we will learn more about it during the show. I want to remind you that if you need prayer at any time during the program, call the number at the bottom of your screen, 770-300-9828. The Bible tells us in Philippians 4:6 not to be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. No matter what problem you are facing, God tells us to come to Him in prayer with thanksgiving. If you need prayer tonight, call that number, 770-300-9828. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a critical discussion. It's a heavy topic, we like to say, but it is one that impacts our society at large and one that needs to be heard. So, Chris, I want to start with you. The national economic cost in the U.S. alone for child sexual abuse is estimated at $9.3 billion with a B in hard currency. But currency can never replace the life stolen from a survivor. So tell me about the impacts on education, mental health, substance abuse, suicide rates, and criminal behavior?
So thank you, Linda, for asking. And I'm going to share some very specific statistics to those areas, but I need to put a little context around them.
Sure.
And that is, when an individual experiences child sexual abuse, many of them go to a place of coping to deal with the insecurity. They've lost a sense of safety. And so they'll often turn to other things to help them cope with that loss of safety. And sometimes those coping mechanisms can be healthy, but oftentimes they lead to maladaptive coping mechanisms. And that's where some of these statistics come into play. Let me just give you a few.
Sure.
Let's take education, for example. An individual who was sexually abused as a child is 40% more likely to drop out of high school.
Wow.
So think about what that does, not just for the near term, but their long-term livelihood, their career, their ability to thrive in society. When you look at something like mental health, by age 30, 85% of child sexual abuse survivors have been diagnosed with at least one mental health disorder. So we think about mental health in our home and family, we think about mental health in the workplace. Child sexual abuse contributes to that. When you get to things like suicide, an individual who's been sexually abused is 3 times more likely to attempt, not think about, not ideate on, but to actually attempt a suicide. So when we talk about our challenges with suicide in our society, one of the causes of that is child sexual abuse. And then incarceration, which will be a main topic for us today. Studies estimate that over 65% of females that are incarcerated were sexually abused as a child. The DOJ did a study not too long ago that put it over 70%. So you think about all these statistics, and as the saying goes, correlation is not causation, but when you have this many corollaries all come together, it's not a coincidence. We're dealing with a major contributor to many of the difficulties that we deal with in our society.
Right. And I think that was probably one of the most astounding things for me to learn. And I can only imagine the general population has no idea, just like you said, of the correlation to a core issue that's contributing to all of these, what we refer to as symptoms, really, of a core issue. And we're putting tremendous resources to treat the symptoms, but not everyone is getting the actual help and healing that they need to deal with the core issue.
Yeah, and this isn't about not treating the symptoms. We need to continue.
Sure.
If someone is dealing with suicidal ideation, we need to help them. If someone's currently incarcerated, we need to help them successfully transition.
Yes.
But if we really want to get ahead of this, we have to go back in time to that early childhood and deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
And we've got to prevent it, and when it does happen, we've got to deal with it better than we are today if we want to avoid some of these downstream issues.
Yeah.
And child sexual abuse is one of the big 3, along with physical abuse and neglect. Those are the big 3 early childhood traumas that really contribute to many of these later societal challenges that we deal with. So it's not about, hey, let's refocus from these symptomatic issues to that early childhood issue. We've got to deal with both.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's an awesome point. So I want to, we are going to talk about incarceration and on all of these issues and how they correlate together. But I want to now turn to Kate. Incarceration is a topic that stirs a lot of different responses from society, depending on their life experiences and their perspectives. But most people, to the point that we were making with Chris, do not make the correlation between child sexual abuse and incarceration. As a matter of fact, you know, I was having a conversation this morning internationally and with an organization who works in the prisons, and even they didn't know the correlation between child sexual abuse and incarceration. So tell us how critical it is to have these women and men go through a healing program as they're preparing to reintegrate into society successfully, because we want a successful reintegration. How critical is it? I know that that I think SAPREA and the National Incarceration Association have just joined a national partnership. So tell us, like, are you guys excited about the healing programs that SAPREA is bringing, and why is it important?
Well, the trauma that results in incarceration is very real. I don't know statistics real well, but the people that we work with, the men and women we work with, are so many of them have trauma prior to prison. Women, like you mentioned, with sexual trauma and domestic violence. Hurt people, yeah. And we lock up people that are hurt all the time. By de facto, the Georgia Department of Corrections has become the #1 provider of mental health, not services, though.
Interesting.
Of folks that have serious and persistent mental illness as a result, a lot of times, of trauma. Okay. So many studies discuss the importance of trauma-informed peer mentoring support. But there's very little, if any, in fact, in our prisons here in Georgia that are trauma-led peer support to help people that have gone through child sexual abuse.
Yep.
They come home, they recidivate. If they don't go back to prison, they die by suicide, by drug overdose, such as my son. So the trauma that that they enter prison with doesn't go away. They have to unpack that bag. The prisons are not capable of doing that. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources necessary. And this is the problem, this is the challenge that I continually battle. I like to say that they're going to build a new prison in Georgia here soon, to the tune of $600 million. Wow. And they're going to put a bunch of bad guys in that prison. They're not going to repair or restore them, they're going to put them there. What could we do with $600 million? If we really worked on the trauma and the impact of trauma and unpack that bag that person carries with them, because when they come home, it's still there. And men particularly pack it differently than women. Yep. So if we're not dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, and it has to start the second day, literally, we believe, the NIA believes that it should be assessments at sentencing. So the day that a person is standing before a judge, because remember, every social ill in our country ends up packaged in a life standing before a judge. If that judge could understand the true trauma that person has experienced, what was wrong, what went wrong, do they have substance use disorder? Do they have serious and persistent mental illness? If they have these things, then how do we repair that person so that they can safely return to society? Yep. A true professional can do that. A counselor in a prison can't. Yeah. They don't have the capacity to really, truly analyze what's right with a person, what's wrong with a person, how long will it take to repair and restore and return. And that's the sentence. That's what the sentence should look like. So during that entire time of incarceration, they should be in programs, they should be in classes, et cetera. And I also like to comment that this new prison, we're not going to call it the Mercedes-Benz prison. We're not going to call it the truest prison. We're going to call it the taxpayers' prison. And so we're footing the bill, and the people are coming home, and they're coming home sicker and more traumatized. Prison is extremely traumatic when you live in it. It was traumatic to me and my family on the outside.
Yeah, you have a personal story. Do you want to touch on your personal story?
Briefly, my son went to prison in 2012. He used heroin the day of his conviction. He detoxed at Fulton County Jail. During his 6 years while he was incarcerated, he had been pepper sprayed, shanked, put in the hole. He used drugs periodically. You name it. He had every major horrible experience that you can think through. He came home October 2018, and he died August 15th, 2021 of a fentanyl overdose as a result of the inability for him to get rid of the trauma that he carried with him. Yeah. And when he was incarcerated, just like anybody that's incarcerated, they have to hold it all in. And women particularly, they can't be vulnerable in there. They can't allow that vulnerability to come out. So it's so fixable. Yeah. It's absolutely fixable, but we can only fix it if we all understand it and the true impact that it does impact every single person that lives in this country, every single one of us.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So, CJ, Grammy Award-winning Maverick City Music, congratulations. Good. Known around the world for inspirational Christian lyrics and music, huge following internationally. At the core of that inspiration is a family story of abuse, pain, and hardship, including child sexual abuse and incarceration. Can you share some of your life story and how it connects to this topic?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And thank you so much for having us today. This is amazing.
It's our pleasure.
Bringing this topic to the forefront and having people discuss it, it's super important and super needed. So it's a blessing to be here. My brother, Tony Brown, is actually the owner and founder of Maverick City Music. We are 10 years apart, and he is the oldest and I'm the youngest out of our 4 siblings. When he was born, my mother was not fit to take care of him, so he moved in with my grandparents. My other siblings actually moved in with other relatives that we had, and then I was the baby. And when I was born, it was my mom's, another chance for her to be a mom, and she did the best that she could, given her addictions and her circumstances. The first time my brother met my mom was actually at a prison visit through the glass. That was his first time meeting our mother. And for me, growing up with her, we lived in hotels, abandoned apartments, halfway houses, and being in those environments and in those communities exposed me personally to the trauma of abuse, drugs, sex at an early age, all of those issues that we're talking about today. I've seen those things firsthand, and if it wasn't for the grace of God in my life and creative outlets in my life and my brother's life, I would, I'd be in prison, I'd be dead, I'd be in the same system. But we made it out by the grace of God. So just providing those outlets for people in this season is really big on our hearts. Living with my grandparents, even in a different environment than it was with my mom, a more Caucasian environment, those problems still exist in those environments as well. So I don't think it's not a black thing, it's not a white thing.
No.
It's a humanity thing. It's a sin problem.
Yeah.
And bringing those issues to the forefront. As Maverick City Music, that's big on our heart. We want to be a part of the conversation. We want to use our platform to make our audience and our demographic aware of what's going on, because a lot of people, they pretend like it's not happening. But if we can put it in their face and say, this is what's happening, it gives our demographic a chance to act on it.
Yeah. Well, you hit on something really important. In researching, there are no socioeconomic, indicators for child sexual abuse. I kind of tested the stats myself and just started asking different people and bringing up the conversation. And when you bring up the conversation, because it's not a conversation that people willingly typically share, but if you bring up the conversation, it's really interesting. The 1 in 5 is true. Yeah. It's very true. I've tested it myself and find it interesting that of the individuals who have shared their stories, they all come from very different backgrounds. Yeah. Some were in situations similar to yours, but others came from what general society would think is a normal environment with access to all the resources that you could imagine, and it still happened. So I don't think people listening, our listeners may think, oh, we didn't know that. But if they just ask around, these are our friends, our neighbors, our family members, our colleagues. You just don't know that they're walking around with the burden that they carry until you actually open a door and allow them to have a conversation.
And that's it, Lynda, these communities and these families, there is secrets. It's like we have these secrets in the background, and even as the church, we have to portray ourselves as a way of, we have it all together, and, we're sinless and we have no problems. But the reality is, like you mentioned, a lot of these families, even in the church, struggle with this kind of trauma and this issue. So it's very important us as, the body of Christ, and as the church to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Kate sort of mentioned Mercedes-Benz Stadium in a different context, but David Moody, you're an icon in the commercial construction industry and actually built Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as the international terminal at the world's largest airport, Hartsfield-Jackson, here in Atlanta. By all standards, to look at you from the outside, you are the epitome of success. But you did all of that while carrying a very heavy burden, which you now openly discuss. How difficult was it for you as a man to share your story publicly?
First of all, thanks for doing this. I think this is so important. I've enjoyed each person's story. Yes, we were one of the general contractors for the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It was 4 partners. For 3 partners, it was 4 total, and same thing on the international terminal. So I don't want anybody to think that we built it on our own, but we had partners. But it's been interesting just listening to the story, because it's so true. I came from 2-parent home, parents educated, educators, and in a very safe environment. South Side Chicago, I'm a baby boomer, I'm 65, so I grew up in the 60s. And we had our regular babysitter, and she couldn't watch us. And my mother started letting the older son watch us, who was 17, 18. And he groomed me with heterosexual stuff, watching little cartoons and different stuff. And I don't even understand sex. And before I know it, I've been groomed to be abused, sexually abused, and then the threats and all that. And I'm one of the fortunate ones, because I only remember it happening 2 or 3 times, different times. My mother had an inkling something was going on, but she brought me into the bedroom, and I know she meant it with love, but she said, don't let anyone touch you. Well, he had already touched me, so now I'm thinking it's my fault. So I immediately shut down, never said a word, thought it was my fault. And, life goes on. And again, I'm one of the fortunate ones, because I moved away to Ann Arbor, Michigan, 4 years later, and I was completely removed from that environment. So when I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan at 14, I was able mentally, I thought, to just bury it, like it never happened and those kind of things. But then when I look back over my life, I remember at 15, all of a sudden I just started losing weight. And they took me to the doctor, and they said nothing was wrong, but I was actually one of my early kind of anxiety, panic type things. I remember as a little kid being rushed to the hospital a couple of times where I said I couldn't breathe, but they take me and everything was fine. So life goes on, come to Atlanta to Morehouse College, finish Morehouse, go get my degree in architecture at Howard University, start my career at Bechtel, thinking, everything's going great, and not ever thinking what happened to me as a child will come back. Fast forward 1992, business 4 years old, life is going well, and my wife finds out someone close to her had been sexually abused. And I just blurted it out. It happened to me. I had no plans on ever saying those words. I thought, so what happened, and this is what I've learned over time, when a trigger happens that you're not planned, it's not planned. Then after I said it, I thought everything was fine. But 3 or 4 months later, I'm having uncontrollable panic attacks, had a complete nervous breakdown, but I couldn't tell anyone. I had to suffer in silence other than my wife. And I'm not even thinking what happened to me at 9 years old could be impacting me at 36. How, because we didn't talk about this. None of this even was discussed. So we were able to kind of put 2 and 2 together, get a little therapy, but even then, I never dealt with the trauma. I just kept powering through like we do. And 20 years later, it wasn't until last year that I finally did cognitive behavioral therapy, because I was tired of just wrestling with anxiety and panic attacks. And I said, I got to get to the root. And when I finally did that, I freed myself. But I didn't speak publicly to 2012. I was 55 years old. And it was the Jerry Sandusky event at Penn State. I'd be working out in the morning and I'd see this stuff on ESPN. And I finally said, I can't be silent anymore, because you never think it happens to anyone that or anything. And because of being successful in business, people definitely wouldn't think it. But what people didn't realize, my business was nowhere near what it could have been, because I spent more time between trying to run a business and raise a family, wrestling with anxiety and the trauma. So at 65, I'm finally getting ready to run my business kind of free. So I'm on the back half of life and finally getting free. So what made me really start speaking up was, I don't want anyone to suffer in silence like that and not be all they could be, because this stuff, trauma does stuff to you that you can't even really understand unless you lived it, but it impacts your performance, your belief in yourself, your self-esteem. And I'll say, and I tell people, when I was at my lowest point in 1992, I remember looking in the mirror and saying, God, I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, I'll never give my faith up. And that was the one important thing that I share all the time, is that I know it's my faith that got me through, because God put people like my wife and some close friends in my life to help me. I mean, my wife's mother in 92 was dying of a brain tumor in Michigan. I'm all messed up. She had just finished nursing school a couple years earlier, so we could have a steady income in the business, and 2 little kids. So it was the most phenomenal thing I'd ever seen and been through. And I definitely know there's a God, because I shouldn't have survived it.
Yeah.
I should have been in a hospital trying to recover. My business should have failed. All those things should have happened. And I just don't want anybody to suffer like that. And we got to do what we can about prevention, but we also got to help people heal.
Yeah.
And the more, and speaking up is not for everybody.
Yeah.
But everybody deserves the right to be healthy and happy. And I speak up and give a voice to the voiceless. And I got this tattoo last year at 65 that says, turn trauma into triumph, to always remind myself how far I have come, because you still have self-esteem issues. And I often think of the survivors who were in these situations for years.
Yeah.
You know, I only had to deal, even though it's horrible, you know, it was like over a summer, but people who've had to live in those environments for years, I can't even imagine that kind of pain. Yeah. You know, so the more we can talk, the more we can help, the better off it'll be.
No, I love it. And you know, when you come out and speak, when CJ comes out and speak, when Kate comes out and speak, you talk about your personal, this is personal to you. You're not talking about someone else. You've lived it. It's so inspirational, and I think that's why it's so important that we're having this discussion today is, you know, for the listeners, there's somebody in your life, you may not know who they are, but there's somebody in your life who is dealing with a traumatic situation like this. And I think just being open, you know, listening, giving them the opportunity. And I know I've heard Chris say before, you know, it's even with little children, we talk about prevention, and we're going to talk more about that in the second segment. But, you know, being open to having the little comfort talks with children at the right age, and I think Dave hit on a perfect segue into the next segment is, you know, saying the right words, because some words, while well-intended, have the opposite impact on children. And so this is why the resources for prevention and having the right talks at the right age, and we'll talk more about that with Chris, that SAPREA has developed a really critical. And SAPREA.org, but we'll say that again in the second segment so that you know to go there. But there are little simple things that you can do and actions that you can take today with your children, your grandchildren, that will help them and prepare them so that they can be empowered and be empowered to come and speak to an adult and let them know. So we're looking forward to continuing in segment 2. We're going to take another break real quick and go to the music set where Joel from Maverick City Music is going to sing Come Back Home.
It's been 7 long years, but it feels much longer than that. And to tell you the truth, well, we've been through hell and back. Remember the good old days when we both snuck out, grabbed some food and the car broke down. The blue blue sky faded black. But I only see you now on the days when I check my phone. Log into Instagram and I saw you wrote a new song. The world may know your name, they might sing along, but deep inside you still feel alone. So won't you come back home? Oh, won't you come back home? Won't you come back home? California 2016, we were thicker than these. Went to carry the love, or the shirts with the cut off sleeves. We were just kids back then, we didn't know that much. Music was the only thing we loved. It was simple enough, but I feel like a stranger now when our roads seem to cross these days. I mean, I get it, we're grown up now, we were bound to go our own way, but down the road we'll laugh at what we both did wrong, and we'll blame traffic 'cause it took so long. Oh, when you come back home, oh, won't you come back home? Ooh, when you come back home, won't you come back home? It'll be like it used to be when you come back home. Hey, when you come back home. Oh, won't you come back home?
That was an amazing performance. We're so excited to have them in the studio. So I want to talk a little bit to Kate and Chris first. I mentioned earlier that the National Incarceration Association and SAPREA have joined forces in a partnership that's currently being piloted in some of the prison systems. What is the benefit of the two of you partnering? And what is the ultimate hope for this pilot program? And Chris, you could talk a little bit about the pilot and where you hope to go with it at SAPREA.
Sure. For the partnership itself, we are very, very grateful to the National Incarceration Association for being willing. When you have two issues like incarceration and child sexual abuse that intersect, it's really difficult for an organization to be an expert in all of it.
Yeah.
So this is why we lean on partnerships. We're experts in addressing child sexual abuse and the resulting trauma. They're experts in incarceration. And blended together, we can meld and blend our programs in a way that truly benefits those that are transitioning out of incarceration. So for me, it's all about relying on each other's expertise to put together a program that actually works, that has a positive impact. And a little bit to the pilot, we've piloted our what we call our support groups in a women's prison facility, and the results were excellent. Now it's time to take that big and wide, and we're not going to do that on our own.
Yeah.
We need the help of organizations like Kate's to do that.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit, before we go to Kate, tell me a little bit about the actual support program. So I know you have your support programs that you do with our healing programs in the general public for people who've gone through healing, but then in the prison system, how's that a little bit different?
Yeah, so, outside the prison system, we can deliver it digitally through the internet. Most prison systems aren't going to give access to internet materials, so we have to modify it. But what's not modified is the trauma-informed care that comes with the support groups. So what we provide is a peer-led, peer-run support group for individuals that have been sexually abused that are currently incarcerated. And what that means is it allows someone with a lived experience, another survivor, to lead a group with other survivors to provide support in learning how to heal from child sexual abuse, learning how that child sexual abuse impacts their day-to-day life. If they're dealing with substance abuse addiction, what is the connection to that? If they're having suicidal ideation, what's the connection with that? And it's not AA for survivors, but it's similar to the AA model in that it's led by survivors for survivors, but with a specific curriculum that SAPREA has prepared to be used within the penal system.
Okay, awesome. So Kate, I mean, National Incarceration Association is working on a lot of different issues, not necessarily the healing component. So from your perspective, where's the intersect, in being able to open a lot of doors for this program? Because to Chris's point, I know you guys have a lot of contacts in the prison system nationwide, and you know a lot of people, and I'm sure I'm going to assume it's a very bureaucratic system, having worked a little bit in other areas that dealing with the different governments and municipalities and all of the layers throughout the country. So tell me, from your perspective, what is the benefit of the relationship?
Well, the challenges are real that you discussed, but we understand that working together works. You can't build a rocket ship without having a rocket science design it, and everybody working together to figure out how to screw the wing in, that one guy. So everybody has to work together with their areas of expertise, like Chris mentioned. We're not experts in trauma care. We're not experts in the things that SAPREA are experts in. But we do understand that we have to connect the dots. But more importantly, we have to connect what's working to the problem. So if this actually is working, what you're doing, which it is, then now we know this works. How do we expand it and scale it? And how do we measure our results so that we have information at the end that shows that we can get these people home and keep them home? Yeah. So that's the ultimate goal. So by working with dozens of nonprofits and government agencies to get to the root of the problem, figure out what's going on with this person, how do we repair and restore and return them home safely to your neighborhoods, because you're coming home there, that's what works. Yeah. We're not about fragmentation, we're not about duplication. A lot of times I think of the NIA as the Red Cross. We like to come in when the hurricane comes, gather all the worker bees to fix all the problems that have to be, make sure that everybody's organized and managed properly so that the problem is solved, and then we can go away. We've seen the results of this. It's working. The bureaucracy is exhausting and unnecessary in my mind. There is no reason why we can't have technology in the prisons to help people heal. There's no reason why we can't have unencumbered communication in our prisons so that people can talk to other family members while they're healing, while they're repairing from the trauma. The system will tell us that we can't have these things because criminal activities will take place as a result of you having a cell phone, Mr. Person in prison. We say, it's already going on. Why not control it and monitor it and make it something that is healing and restorative? Right. So, it's not, none of this is complicated. I think that the government and the policymakers, because let's face it, until policymakers agree with the families and those that live in our prisons that we need more resources, we need more money to repair. We don't need to build a new prison. We need to let people go home. Yeah. We need to heal people so that they don't come back. It's so simple.
So tell me a little bit. So the program itself, if I read it right, is really for individuals when they're coming up on their opportunity for reintegration, which is, I guess, the parole hearing. So the program, they go through the program, the SAPREA program, during this time period, and they actually get certification. So the certificate actually goes in their parole file, and it's an opportunity for the person to show that, first of all, they acknowledge their trauma and they have taken steps for healing. So it's a good faith effort, and so the certification really has various levels of meaning. It could actually have influence on their ability to be paroled, but I think more importantly, to your point, is the sustainability. When a person is reintegrating into society, you want that to be a successful reintegration. And from what I've learned from your organization is reintegration is really, really hard. it's hard. And to your own experience personally, you know that firsthand. So, you know, this is like the first step for them getting that healing for that core issue that we talked about earlier. And hopefully the symptoms then will be, you know, they can manage their trauma and not lean on those other symptoms that lead them down the path again and could lead them back into incarceration.
Mm-hmm. Well, the parole board should always completely embrace any kind of certificate that person has earned. They don't always do that. They'll see it in the file. They won't necessarily release the person based on the certification.
Right.
And then the second thing, we need to have the proper handoff. When they leave the facility that they've been living in for extended periods of years and years and years perhaps, what does that continuum of care look like, and what is that model? And we want to build that model so there's no gap, there's no space. They don't come out the gate, here, I got my certificate, now what? I've got my bus ticket, now what? We have to make sure that we continue that care.
Yeah.
But parole board, you know, that time frame when they should be healing, again, should start from the moment they step foot in prison, not just because they're getting ready to come home. It needs to start at the beginning and work through, and then parole should embrace any kind of healing that took place and allow that person to come home.
Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. So CJ and David, both of your roles, you're both taking steps. You have made decisions in your life to take specific actions towards education, towards healing opportunities. David, you do a lot of public speaking nationwide. You've written a book. And CJ, through the music at Maverick and also the initiative, you guys are doing some great work too, but in very different ways. So tell me specifically what you're doing and what you're called to do and the programs that you're working with individually.
I'll let you go first, CJ. I'm enjoying listening to you.
Great, brother, great, man. I mean, so God is just doing an amazing thing in this season. He's bringing the right people for such a time as this to make this collective impact in our city. So we're, trying to bring together pastors, rappers, cops, white, black, just the city in general for this collective impact to amplify the resource and the work we're doing in the city. Yes, and we're seeing doors open up every day. God is opening up all the doors for us. We actually just went into a prison last month with Kurt Franklin, and we did a week-long writing camp there with the inmates, and we actually wrote our last record in a prison with the inmates with Kurt Franklin, and that's the next one we're about to release. And we had the heads of DOCs from all over the country fly in just for that event, and it was actually the largest event in Florida DOC history. So God is definitely doing something new in the prison system just by allowing us to be able to go in there with 60 members of our staff to be able to make this happen. Outside of those worship events in the prisons, we also are implementing programs in there. So we actually have our whole Maverick writing camp in the prison. We have a curriculum for that, as well as a hip-hop program for the inmates where they can learn production, songwriting, engineering, and then they actually can get certified in prison for that recording software, which empowers them. So we're really excited about those programs. And outside of the prison stuff, me and my wife, we actually live right in Bankhead on the west side of Atlanta. We live on Simpson Road, which is the most dangerous street in our city. Me and my wife live right there with 4 young teenage boys that we've been fostering for about 2 years now, and that we disciple. And seen tremendous fruit just by taking them into our home and showing them what a family looks like. They watch me love my wife. They watch me love my newborn baby. They see the dynamic of what a healthy marriage and a healthy household looks like. And it's definitely changing the way they look at life and they look at their future. Outside of the housing program, we have an alternative middle school in the neighborhood as well, especially since COVID. And for public schools, just gangs and violence and all those issues are they're just running havoc in our community in this public schools. So providing a safe place for our kids to learn. We have trauma groups, we have counseling. So we just provide a safe place for them to learn and get an education in the community. We also have a recording studio in smack dab in the middle of Bankhead, after-school mentorship programs where we teach the kids how to write, produce, engineer, get those skills, as well as we have fashion design classes, we have coding classes, esports. So really just providing those creative outlets for our kids, the same outlets that me and my brother needed to be able to get to where we're at today. Unfortunately, the inner city communities, they don't always have the same resource and opportunities as other communities, so we go in and we're trying to provide and cultivate those opportunities for them.
That's so inspirational. Yeah, the first time I ever met you, which was, over a video conference call, I left that call so inspired because your outlook on life and just knowing some of the pain and the trauma that you've experienced in your life, and yet you're the most positive person. And it shows in everything that you do. So,
well, to Mr. Moody's point, or to David Moody's point, honestly, if it's not for faith in Christ and having that rock in your life, I mean, without a support system, without your faith, without believing in something that's bigger than you, it's almost impossible to overcome this kind of neglect and trauma. So, putting your trust in the Lord and putting your trust in His plans for you, that's what really propels you into be able to take on this kind of weight.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, David,
yes.
You've done a lot of speaking in the last few years since you decided to share your story, and I imagine there's no telling how many, specifically men, but probably women too, but men, because men don't typically, to your point, they don't want to talk about this. It's not the macho thing to do. And I think someone like you who has been so successful, you're the perfect voice to inspire other men to deal with their trauma. But tell us a little bit about what you've been doing over the last few years and what your program looks like.
Well, one of the things I remember the most was how alone I felt. You heard of people saying they've been sexually abused, but they never talked about panic attacks, anxiety, trauma. So when you're going through that, you feel weak, you're embarrassed, you feel like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not just being able to blow this off? And after I started doing research and talking to other people, talking to organizations like yours over the years, I started realizing what I was going through was actually typical. But because society doesn't talk about those things and deal with them, you feel all alone. So I just realized that I say, God put me in a position that my business didn't fail in '92. I survived. That part of my journey was to help others by just sharing my story. But the part that really gets to me, and we've talked about this, is when I get those calls or emails or direct messages from people who say I saved their life.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm happy, but God, I'm so sad because they have reached a point that life being dead felt better to them than to keep trying. Yeah. And so what I really focus on is helping people see their life is worth living, okay? But we have to give them the resource. So I started a website in 2015 called moodyspeaks.com. And you can buy my book there. But I started it because not everybody is comfortable going to group sessions or whatever. So I started something where people could go here and read successful stories of other survivors, see resources of where to call to get help. I do work with Darkness to Light also. I'm in their training film. I do work with the Boy Scouts. I'm in their training film. Because most organizations really do want to do right and help. But I just realized we have all these like child advocacy centers for children, but we don't really have anything for adults who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse or trauma. So where do they go?
Yeah.
Where are the stories for them to hear and know? Because when you hear somebody else's story, you go, okay, I'm not alone. I'm okay. What I'm going through, there's hope. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing I focus on is trying to give people hope. Because when you got hope, you'll keep trying.
Right.
You know, because I have a saying, we all will be knocked to our knees, but we're all so much stronger than we realize. And we will get up, but we got to give people a reason to get up. Yeah. Like what you're doing with the incarcerated, I think is so important because so many people are suffering in pain. They feel just all alone. And that's what especially childhood sexual abuse does to you. Something is stolen from you, the innocence and safety and comfort, and you realize you're always trying to find that, but you'll never find it. But life is just so incredible. I'm hiking Mount Kilimanjaro next January.
Yay, that's awesome.
And I'm doing it specifically because that will be my greatest test of anxiety, because it's the distance is not the issue. It's the elevation. And the elevation, when you feel like you can't breathe, is like having a panic attack. So for me, I'm doing Mount Kilimanjaro for everybody who suffers with anxiety and panic attacks to show that we can do it. Now, my body, you know, being physically fit to do this, I'm fine. That I got. And I'm just hoping that my body oxygen level will allow me to do it. But whether I make it or not, I'm going to try. Yes. Because I just want, and also, I'll be 66 when I do that. I want people to understand we will age, but we'll never become old. That's my saying. I will age, but I'll never become old.
Oh, I love that.
So I'm doing this for every survivor of trauma and everybody who deals with anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm doing it for myself to actually have that big test. I did the Grand Canyon 5 years ago. I rafted for 8 days, slept without a tent, slept under the stars, and then I hiked out the Grand Canyon, 4,600 feet, 7.5 miles, and I was 60 years old when I did that, and it was an awesome experience. And I'm gonna close with this. What I learned on that trip was how much negative noise we hear every day, because I didn't have any internet, no cell phone, no nothing. You know, all I had was what was nature and God and how bright the stars really were. And I realized how much negative noise we hear every day. Yeah. And I challenge all of us to turn off and get out in nature or just be still for at least an hour a week and see how good it would feel.
I love that. I love that. So we have about 5 minutes, and Chris, I want to let you wrap it up. SAPREA has clinically proven third-party researched healing retreats and resources that are totally free. Your ultimate goal is to protect our children and stop the atrocity from happening in the first place. I mean, if we could wave a magic wand today, that would be the ultimate goal, is just to stop it today. How difficult is it to prevent the abuse? And talk to the listeners about what simple steps parents and caregivers can take to protect their children, whether it's their own children or their grandchildren, or just their community. Because this is an issue that's impacting, as we've discussed, so many sectors across our society. We deal with it every day in one way or another. It's just most people don't realize what's at the core. So tell us in your words, like, what can we do?
So, Lynda, I have some good news here, and I think it's a great way to end and leave hope for our viewers. So, the good news is the parts of child sexual abuse that are extremely difficult to solve are a relatively small percentage of the issue. The parts of sexual abuse that are much easier to solve are the major portion of the issue. So if parents and primary caregivers, so think grandma, think childhood education, think after school programs. When I say primary caregivers, those other people that are investing in that early childhood beyond mom and or dad. If they will just take a little bit of time and first put it on their list, okay? That's the first thing. We each have our lists of things we do to keep the kids we love safe. Yep. Sexual abuse is not on that list for most people. That needs to move from wherever it is onto the list. That's the first thing. We have to make a decision. that, hey, I'm gonna commit to this. The second thing is to get educated. There's nothing that will do more to reduce childhood sexual abuse than a parent or primary caregiver learning about the issue and the things that they can do as a trusted adult to reduce the likelihood the child will be abused. The good news is there's a lot of education that's already there. You can find some of it on our website at SAPREA.org. The third thing is then to open dialogue with their children, because prevention is as much about intervention when something starts going south as it is about preventing something from going south. And what I mean by that is, in those early days of grooming, as David described, right? If David had the words to go to mom or dad and explain what was happening as a child, the likelihood that they could intervene and stop it before there was an actual physical abuse going on, it goes up tremendously, and the risk goes down tremendously. The other thing to realize is that there was a minor on the other side of David's story. And the things that parents do to reduce the risk of sexual abuse also reduce the likelihood that their child will be the abuser, or in the case of David's story, the babysitter.
Yeah.
Right? So when parents engage in open dialogue around topics to do with sexual abuse and sexual health, it gives children the words. I'm going to share a really fast story to make this point.
Okay.
My daughter was in 6th grade. She came home from the playground and she said, "Dad, what does the word prostitute mean? I know it has something to do with sexual abuse. I know it has something to do with sex." Picture what's happening there. A 6th grade girl asking her dad that question. There aren't a lot of 6th grade girls that would ask their dad that question. The reason why she was comfortable asking me that question is because we'd had hundreds, if not thousands, of little discussions every day that made that comfortable for her. What's the alternative? She Googles it, because she's gonna find out what the word prostitute means.
Yeah.
The moment she Googles, she's opening herself up to predatory behavior.
There you go.
Because almost all physical sexual abuse today, not in the past, but today, starts digitally. And
That's
so
amazing.
we've got to open that dialogue with our kids.
It's just that simple. Go to SAPREA.org. I think you've got websites for all the programs here. Educate yourself, to Chris's point. Education is the key. Using the right words with your children is really important. And I know some of those resources are on the SAPREA website, as well as having the little talks, empowering your children and having that level of trust, to Chris's point, so that they will come to you and ask questions. It's really just that simple. We can make a difference. We can prevent this from happening, and we as adults have a responsibility, because our society is suffering. When you look at the hundreds of millions of people, not just in the U.S., but around the globe, this is happening in every country around the world, that are suffering because of child sexual abuse and the impact on our society. We must do something to stop it. Thank you for joining in this crucial conversation.